Hey everyone, Pete Brooker here in part 2 of this Backstage series. I'm taking you behind the scenes of the podcast. Last week was the blog, this week the podcast, next week, who knows, maybe Backstage with my secret sludge recipes. For now, let me tell you, the podcast was launched back in July 2018. Wow, feels longer. And it was born because Matt Spacer of Bond Suits and I were launching a book, and we didn't want to launch it cold. We wanted to really get in bed with the Bond community and hopefully create some discussions about the style of James Bond. We've since morphed that into other things, and I'll get back to that in a bit. For now, let me take you way back, because I need to lay the table on this one as to what got me into podcasts. I used to work in a cricket bat factory in Essex, and I was stationed most of the time by a bandsaw making wooden clefts. It was noisy as hell. And so we all had to wear ear defenders. And I managed to find these ear defenders that had a 3.5mm jack input, so I could plug in my phone and listen to podcasts. It was pretty great, actually. I even remember listening to James Bond radio way back when. I would listen to Adam Carolla, still listen to him, and Hollywood Babylon, etc. So that's how I fell in love with podcasts. When I moved town, switched jobs, opened up a clothes store with my best friend from school, I started writing for an online magazine called Menswear Style. And I was interviewing some pretty big names. I remember interviewing Idris Elba in a bus stop over the phone for some kind of drinks brand he was putting his name to. Anyway, I said to my editor, I can record these calls and we can put them out as podcasts as well as articles. He said, sure, set it up. So I went out, bought a couple of microphones, an amp, and some software called Ecamm, and recorded all these phone calls over Skype. So I should say we recorded them over Skype, and that's how the podcasts came to be. And I've since done over 100 episodes for Menswear Style. That's still going on. But back then, the fields of podcasting were green and lush and teeming with naked ladies. Because it wasn't really a thing back then. You know, it's saturated now in comparison. And with social media kicking off, it just felt like everyone could be reached, every actor, every singer and whatnot. I remember a friend who was a guest writer for his local church magazine, and he asked, could I get George Foreman on the podcast? And he would then transcribe it for his church magazine. I went to George Foreman's Twitter account, because he's a religious man, is George, and got hold of his agent or his family member, and George said, sure. Hello, can I speak to George Foreman Sr., please?
This is George.
Oh my God, George, it's Pete Brooker calling from the... It's nuts, really, when I think back on that, because nowadays agents must get 1,000 requests a day to be on a podcast or a YouTube show, so it's not like the gold rush it was, say, like 7-8 years ago. Anywho, fast track to today. The From Tailors with Love podcast. Back in the day, it was very much Matt and I, but after about 75 episodes of solid Bond talk, I really needed to start talking about something else. I felt it was getting a bit stale, and I do watch other films other than Bond, and wanted to talk about other films. So that's when, roughly half a year ago, I started to seek out some costume designers from films, and if I like the film, I try and get some first-hand stories from the people that actually made the clothes. I've always found that more interesting. It can be quite a long, drawn-out process getting guests on. Usually I'd go to IMDb, get the costume designer's name, then Google him or her on social media. Often then it's another process going through an agent or a booking agent or whatnot. So there is a bit of detective work. I mean, not that much, but some mild sleuthing has to happen. Now, I record the podcast on this microphone, and as I've alluded to before, the mother-in-law likes to sit in sometimes. Completely normal. And I use a backup lapel mic, which I have attached on a nail file here. That goes into a Zoom dictaphone. So I get the clean and direct feed. And then I edit that in GarageBand, and you can see all the edit points here where the audio is split. That's basically all the ums and buts and racial slurs, and that's just Matt Spacer, by the way. I'm kidding. Anyway, I edit all these on like the commutes to and from work. and it just makes for a cleaner show, I suppose. So I then repurpose about 5 minutes for the YouTube channel, and just to give people a flavour and put a face to a name, etc. Although that's still work in progress. It's not to everyone's liking, is it? The numbers over 85,000 unique downloads now for the podcast, which is very, very humbling. And especially when we moved away from the Bond content, I didn't know if anyone was going to tune in anymore, but people stuck with us. That's very special. So if you're a podcaster, I would recommend Libsyn. I pay around $15 a month, and there are different plans. If you want to make money, you need to get over about 20,000 downloads in the US. So yeah, this ain't going to be making me rich. Storage. I think you'll be able to get about 200 megabytes a month on the plan that I'm on, which works out to be about 4 hours worth of content. Sounds about right. So I try and keep all of my episodes under 30 minutes, and it's actually something that I get complimented on is people say, I like your podcast because it's short. I'm like, thank you. Can you say that about anything else, by the way? You know, you're great in the sack because you're done and done in 2 minutes. Some guys draw it out for hours. You're good because I can fit you in the commercial break. Anyway, like I said, I go off the grass. I hope this has been of some use. If you are starting a podcast and you need to know anything else, leave me a comment. I'll see if I can help you out. I know this is a bit indulgent, but I do get asked quite regularly, what equipment do I need to start a podcast, etc. And I'll leave a link to my About page below, and you can find all the links to all the gear that you need. Alrighty. That was exhausting. These are exhausting.